Gary Brasher, please.
Thank you, Congressman Giffords, and again to the GAO for coming out. Others have spoken very eloquently already. I'm not going to cover a lot of the same points that they already have in the interest of time and just duplicity. I do want to touch on something that Rich Bowman brought up, though, because I do think it's important. I think the uniqueness of this particular corridor has not been perhaps properly emphasized. I recognize Laredo, I've been there, I've been to some of the checkpoints in California, and I know each community probably has their own unique elements to it. I think given the geography of our area between the Santa Ritas and the Tumacacra Mountain Range, with the river, with the railroad track, with the power line, with the gas line, with all these other corridors around it, to me, if this checkpoint were to go in order for the Border Patrol to protect that community, both north and south, I think they're going to literally have to turn both Green Valley, Saladita, Tubac, Amado, other communities south into an absolute militarized zone. That's just what's going to have to happen. I think that's what many of us wanted when we decided to live in that community. I think that's nothing that was ever on the table when we moved to that community, so I just wanted to point that out. The other thing that I think was touched on by someone else that didn't really strike me until today, and that is that if our government is prepared to spend this much money this far north of the border, it sounds to me like this border will never be secured. If their plan is they can't do it, it won't be done. We now have a new border if this checkpoint goes in with all the military support.
Carol Cullen.
Thank you, Congresswoman Giffords, and thank you to GAO. I, myself, for approximately 20 years, did the kind of work that you're doing, and I can appreciate all of the time and effort that you put into it. And when I read your report, I was optimistic. I understood what you were saying in the report and the limitations you had to work with in the data. Mr. Stena has very clearly established that the data you receive from our communities, the crime statistics, the tourism data, the real estate data, did not allow you to draw any conclusions. You made it sound, though, Mr. Stena, as if you had analyzed the data and the data showed that there was no impact. I think from reading Amy's report, it is that because the data are unreliable, you're unable to use them to establish any impact. And I read the same thing with regard to the Border Patrol data. Your findings establish that you cannot say that checkpoints, permanent checkpoints, are effective. I would like an opportunity for our community work group to present this report in another way. There is a very different way to present these findings. I was shocked, as have others stated, that the DHS performance goal of attempting to detect and apprehend only 30% of illegal aliens and contraband is abysmally low. And I understand from your presentation that it sounds as if GAO has accepted that. I didn't read that in your report. I was hopeful to think that we might be able to do something with that. To have 70% coming through our neighborhoods. 2 points in my mind. You state that there's no hard data to establish the impact of a permanent checkpoint in our communities. Every time we report that over 1 million pounds of marijuana or drugs have been confiscated at the checkpoint or north of the checkpoint, that's 1 million pounds that has traveled through our neighborhoods. Those seizures, the illegal aliens and the trafficking is happening in our neighborhoods. The arrests, the apprehensions may be made north, but they're coming through our backyards. And finally, I would just like to state, in thinking about what Secretary Napolitano said earlier this summer in addressing the need to improve our ports of entry, she said that our ports of entry should be the last line of defense, not the first.
Briefly, thank you for reading the report. Let me just take them in the order, if I can remember. What we're trying to say with the data are that they would not, they're not fine enough to lead you to the conclusion on impact of the checkpoint. I don't think we're in disagreement on that. Okay. With respect to the 30% figure, what we were doing in this report is to just note that that is their goal, is to collect, or is to identify and interdict 30% of illegal crossings and contraband and drugs at the ports of entry. We did a report, which I testified on in November '07, on the performance of port of entry inspections. So we're well aware of how well they don't do, but that's not the Border Patrol. That's CBP and different inspectors. And, as far as sort of the government giving up, and I don't think anybody's giving up. I can let the chief speak to the giving up issue, but I've been down here dozens of times over the years, and I haven't seen anybody giving up, either on the ground or in the air or at the checkpoints. If that's the perception that's left, then there's an issue that has to be dealt with there.
Chief Goldberg, do you want to address that 30% number?
No, ma'am, the 30% number, that's a port of entry, and that's not what we're doing. The one thing about the checkpoint, and ma'am, first up, the 1.1 million pounds is throughout our sector. Within the I-19 corridor, or at or near the checkpoint, there's been over 84,000 pounds of marijuana seized at or near the checkpoint. And it's almost a 50-50 split at and near. And there's also been almost 6,300 people arrested at or near the checkpoint. The majority of those, not at the checkpoint, but in the flanking areas. But without that checkpoint or the resources to work the flanking areas, all 80+ thousand pounds of marijuana and over 6,000 people make it into our country. So the checkpoint brings that value. It gives us that defense in depth. In a perfect environment, we would secure the border at the border. And we're always going to be striving and working towards that. But we can't simply ignore having a defensive posture until we can accomplish that. Otherwise, we'd be derelict, and we owe the American people more than that.
As far as the comments about the data and how I'm collecting it, I sat across the table with Matt and Amy for several hours and looked at how we do that as law enforcement, how we come up with a formula that says X plus Y equals Z in effectiveness. And it's really difficult for us to do. If we're guilty of something, and I was at Nogales in charge of that checkpoint for several years now, Mr. White is, we collect data primarily for operational purposes, primarily to look at how we're going to deploy resources. So we look at activity levels, we look at seizures, we look at arrests. And that's been our primary focus. And I think GAO realized that. We did struggle with how to come up with a formula and how to come up with a way of putting the information that we do gather into a way that translates to effectiveness or ineffectiveness. And that's why we're putting together these work groups. We acknowledge we haven't done a good job of that, but from an operator's perspective, that's probably the reason is we've been collecting data from an operations perspective, so that we can look at how to deploy resources, not necessarily to justify the existence of our operation. And we understand that we have to be accountable, we have to do that, so we are working towards that. As far as the goal, the 30% for the Border Patrol, we don't have a particular goal that we want to catch 50% or 60% of what's coming across the border. We want to do the best we can with what we have. We don't have a
At the ports of entry, the federal goal is to detect and apprehend 30% of major illegal activity. And this shows the need for a three-tiered strategy